The phone in the corner of the office had not rung in 3 weeks, and when it finally did, just after 11 on a Tuesday night, Walter Pruitt almost did not pick it up. His hands were black to the wrist. The lift was down, the bay doors were shut against the cold, and the only light still burning was the cage bulb over the workbench, where he had been chasing a coolant leak that did not want to be found. He wiped 2 fingers on a rag, lifted the receiver, and heard a voice. He did not know, say that a man was stranded out on the county road with a bike that would not turn over, and 40 miles of dark in every direction. Walter looked at the clock. He looked at the door. Then he reached for his coat. That single choice, made by a tired man in an empty shop, would bring 60 engines into his gravel lot before the month was out. He did not know that yet. All he knew was that somebody was stuck, and the night was getting colder, and he had a truck that ran. The shop was called Pruitt Motor Works, and it sat at the dead end of a frontage road where the highway peeled off toward the interstate, and the town gave up trying. His father had hung the sign in 1971, and Walter had never taken it down. He was 58 now, broad through the shoulders and going soft in the middle, with gray stubble he kept clipped close, and a left knee that told him the weather a day before it arrived. He had a face that strangers trusted and creditors did not fear, and that combination had nearly cost him the building twice. He drove out past the grain elevator with the heater, wheezing and his high beams cutting a tunnel through the fields. He found the man right where the voice had said. A dark shape sitting on the guardrail beside a motorcycle tipped onto its kickstand. The rider stood when the truck slowed. He was younger than Walter expected, maybe 30, lean and quiet, with a beard and a leather vest and grease already on his knuckles from trying to fix the thing himself. She just quit, the man said. Lights, everything, dead. Walter crouched beside the bike and put his hand on the engine case, still warm. He clicked his flashlight and traced the wiring down from the bars, and within a minute he had found it, a corroded ground strap that had finally let go. It was the kind of repair that took a part worth less than a cup of coffee and an hour of patience. He had neither part nor patience in the truck, so he did the only thing that made sense. He loaded the bike onto his trailer with the winch, told the man to climb in, and drove them both back to the shop. The rider said his name was Cole. He did not say much else, and Walter did not press. Some men talked when their machines failed them, and some men went silent, and Walter had learned long ago not to mistake the silent ones for unfriendly. He put coffee on. He pulled the bike into the bay, got it up on the lift, and went looking through. 40 years of drawers for a ground strap that would fit. He found one in a coffee can of salvaged hardware his father had labeled in grease pencil 40 years before, the writing gone almost to shadow. He cleaned the contact points with a wire brush, scraped the corrosion down to bright copper, and set the strap with a dab of dielectric grease so the road salt would not find it again for a long time. The engine turned over by midnight, caught and settled into an idle. Walter stood listening to it the way some men listen to a heartbeat, hearing not the sound, but the small irregularities. Under the sound there were several. While he worked, he noticed other things. The way a man who has done a thing for 40 years cannot help but notice. The chain was past due for replacement and stretched dangerously, the slack in it gone to a slap he could hear over the engine. The rear tire was worn to the wear bars on one edge, the kind of uneven wear that meant the bike pulled in the wet. A fork seal had begun to weep, a thin dark line of oil tracking down the chrome where there should have been none. None of it was what had stranded the man tonight. All of it would, in time, on a back road in the dark in worse weather than this, and Walter had towed enough machines off enough shoulders to know exactly how that story ended. "Your chain's about to let go," he said over his shoulder. Cole only nodded from his stool, watching. "Tires done on the right. Forks leaking. None of it stranded you tonight. All of it was going to. How much to do it right? I'm not telling you how much. I'm telling you what's wrong." Walter rolled the parts cart over with the toe of his boot. "Whether I fix it is a different conversation, and we'll have it when I'm done." So Walter fixed those too. He broke the old chain and pressed a new master link he had been saving for a job that never came. He pulled his own spare tire off the wall, the one sized for a bike like this that he had bought on a hunch and never sold, and mounted it by hand because the machine that did it faster had been repossessed in March. He pressed in a fork seal from the last set in the drawer. He worked without hurry and without speaking, and the younger man watched every movement with an attention that Walter, had he thought about it, might have found unsettling, the way a student watches a thing he intends to remember, or a witness watches a thing he intends to testify to. He did not ask whether Cole could pay because he had already decided not to charge him. He told himself it was because the man was stranded and far from home, and that was simply what you did. The truer reason sat further back, in a place Walter rarely visited. His own father had been the kind of man who fixed things for people who could not pay, and the shop had survived on that reputation longer than it had survived on money. Walter was the last of that line. There would be no one to hang the sign after him. A part of him, working alone under the cage light at 1 in the morning, wanted to be the kind of man his father had been, at least once more, before the building went under for good. Cole watched the whole thing from a stool by the door, saying little, missing nothing. When the new chain was on, and the tire swapped from Walter's own spare and the fork seal pressed in, the rider stood and pulled a folded roll of bills from his vest. "How much?" "Nothing," Walter said. He was already wiping down his tools. "You were stuck. Now you're not. Go home." Cole did not move. He held the money out a moment longer, then put it away slow, and the look on his face was not the look of a man getting away with something. It was the look of a man filing the night somewhere. He would not forget it. He asked Walter's name. He asked the name of the shop. He looked at the faded sign through the office window and read it twice, the way you read a thing you intend to repeat to somebody later. "You did more work than that, Strap," Cole said. "The strap's what stranded you. The rest just would have." Walter shrugged. "A bike that drops a man out here doesn't get to keep its other secrets." Cole almost smiled. He pulled his helmet on, walked the machine out into the cold, and the engine caught on the first kick and held a steady idle it had not held in a year. He sat there a moment, letting it warm, and through the bay door Walter saw him take one more look at the sign before he rolled out onto the frontage road, and the single tail light shrank and was gone. Walter shut the doors, killed the cage light, and went home to a house with one lamp on. He did not think about Cole again for 9 days. He had bigger problems, and they all wore the same face. The face belonged to Garrett Voss. Voss was the kind of man that town had decided to be proud of before it understood what he was. He had grown up 2 streets over from the shop, gone east to school, come back with a finance degree and a way of speaking that made aldermen nod. He had bought up the old rail district parcel by parcel through a holding company nobody could trace back to him, and he had a plan for the frontage road that involved a self-storage development and a strip of franchise lots. And the only thing standing in the geometric center of that plan was Pruitt Motor Works. Walter had turned down the first offer because it was insulting. He had turned down the second because it was worse. After that, the offer stopped, and the trouble started. Well, a code inspector who had never once visited the shop in 30 years suddenly found 9 violations in an afternoon, things that had been true and unremarked since the Carter administration: a handrail an inch too low, a fire extinguisher a year past its tag, a paint locker that had held the same cans of touch-up since Walter was a young man. A lien appeared against the property over a sewer assessment Walter had never been billed for, a figure with no invoice behind it that nonetheless attached itself to his deed like a tick. His insurance carrier dropped him with a letter full of words his lawyer charged him $200 to translate, and the translation came down to a single sentence that someone had told them the building was a risk. Each thing alone was survivable. Together they were a noose, drawn slow, and the hand on the rope never once let Walter see it pull. He had tried in the early weeks to fight each thing on its own terms. He drove to the county building and stood in line behind a glass partition and was told the assessment was in the system, and the system did not explain itself. He fixed the handrail and the extinguisher and watched the inspector find 3 new things on the next pass. He called the insurance company and was transferred until the call simply ended, not hung up on, just dissolved, the way everything in this fight dissolved the moment he reached for it. He understood slowly that he was not fighting a man. He was fighting a procedure, and the procedure had been pointed at him by a man who would never have to put his own name on any single piece of it. Voss never threatened him. That was the thing Walter could not make anyone understand. The man would pull into the lot in a spotless gray sedan, step out in pressed slacks and polished shoes that had never seen a shop floor, and speak in the warm, regretful tone of a man delivering bad news he wished he did not have to deliver. He would talk about market forces and changing times and the difficulty of small operators in the modern economy. He would call Walter by his first name, like an old friend. He would admire the building's bones and lament the cost of bringing it to code, as if the code had not been weaponized against it by his own quiet hand. And every visit, the walls came a foot closer. "I want you to land soft, Walt," Voss said the last week of that month, leaning against his sedan with his arms crossed and the sun glinting off his watch. "That's all I've ever wanted. There's a number where everybody walks away whole. We're past it now, but I can probably still find it if you stop making this hard." "You filed a lien for a sewer line that runs the other direction," Walter said. "Did I?" Voss looked genuinely sorrowful. "The county files those. I just buy the paper afterward. You'd be amazed what's for sale, Walt, if you know who to ask. The county doesn't want to fight any more than I do. Nobody does. Except you, apparently." He pushed off the car and straightened his cuffs. "Think about your knee. Think about the winters. A man your age shouldn't be sleeping above a shop that's already lost." He got in the sedan and pulled out into the flat afternoon light, and Walter stood in the lot a long time after the dust settled. He had a court date in 11 days. He could not afford to lose and could not afford to fight. His lawyer had stopped using the word win and started using the word terms. He did not call anyone. There was no one to call. He went back inside and chased the coolant leak he had never found, because it was the only problem in his life he had any chance of solving, and even that one was beating him. The first engine arrived on a Thursday. Walter heard it before he saw it. A single big twin coming up the frontage road slow, and he came to the bay door wiping his hands, expecting a customer he would have to turn away because he could no longer afford the parts to fix anything. The bike rolled into the lot, and the rider cut the engine and took off his helmet, and it was Cole. "Mr. Pruitt." He nodded like 9 days had not passed. Got a minute for you. Sure, she running all right? Better than she's run since I bought her. Cole set the helmet on the seat. That's not why I'm here. He looked around the lot, at the faded sign, at the orange notice taped to the office window that Walter had not been able to bring himself to take down. He read the notice the way he had read the sign. Slow, filing it. That's a condemnation posting, Cole said. It was not a question. It's a long story and not a good one. You don't want it. Try me. So Walter told him. He had not meant to. He had told no one the whole of it, not his lawyer, not the few old customers who still drifted in. Something in the younger man's stillness pulled it out of him, and once it started, it came all the way. The offers, and the inspector, and the lien, and the sewer line that ran the other way, and the court date 11 days out, and the man in the polished shoes who bought county paper. Cole listened without moving. When Walter finished, the rider was quiet a long moment. This Voss, Cole said finally, he do this around here a lot, to other people. I don't know. Probably men like that don't do it once. Cole nodded slowly. He looked at the sign one more time. Then he put his helmet back on, and before he kicked the engine over, he said one thing. You didn't ask me what I do that night, or who I ride with. Didn't figure it was my business. It wasn't. Cole's eyes held something Walter could not name. It is now. You did a kindness for a stranger and asked nothing. Where I come from, that doesn't just evaporate. It goes on a ledger, and the ledger gets balanced. He kicked the bike alive. Sit tight, Mr. Pruitt. Don't sign anything. He rolled out, and Walter stood in the lot and thought, not for the first time, that he had no idea what he had set in motion. He told himself it was nothing, a grateful man making a grateful noise. He had heard such noises before, and learned that gratitude, like everything else, came cheap and faded fast. He was wrong about that, the way he had been wrong about a great many things involving men he had judged by their leather. Over the next 8 days, 2 things happened in parallel, and Walter only understood one of them. The thing he understood was that Voss tightened the screw. A second inspector came, then a third. A man Walter did not recognize photographed the building from the road for an hour. The court date was confirmed by a clerk who would not meet his eyes. Voss himself came once more, no longer sorrowful, the warmth gone out of his voice like heat out of a cooling engine, and named a final number that was a third of what he had offered the first time, and told Walter it expired at the courthouse door. The thing Walter did not understand was happening, somewhere he could not see. It was happening in the back room of a clubhouse 40 miles north, a cinder-block building at the edge of an industrial road, where the air held stale coffee and old leather and the blue ghost of cigarette smoke that never fully left the walls. There, a man named Cole laid out everything he had learned on a scarred table in front of men who listened, the way Cole had listened in the shop, without interruption, without performance, their faces lit low by a single hanging bulb. It was happening in front of a laptop owned by a young rider they called Sparrow, lean and quick-eyed, who had a gift for finding the things powerful men believed they had buried, and who was already typing before Cole finished talking. It was happening in the silence of a heavy-set old man at the head of the table, the president of an outfit that called itself the Iron Vow Motorcycle Club, his gray beard catching the bulb light, his hands folded, who heard the whole account of the mechanic and the ground strap and the polished shoes, and who said, when it was done, only 4 words. He took no money. No, Cole said. Wouldn't even let me leave it on the bench. Found 3 other things wrong with my bike I didn't ask him to touch, and fixed those too. Told me a machine that drops a man on a back road doesn't get to keep its other secrets. Cole turned his coffee cup a half turn on the scarred wood. Then I told him my name, and he shook my hand, and never once asked who I rode with. Didn't care. It wasn't part of why he helped. A few of the men shifted. The youngest of them, a prospect barely off his probation who went by Tully, leaned forward like he wanted to say something and thought better of it under the weight of the room. The old man, whose name was Del Hargrove, and whom every man in the room called Preacher, for reasons none of the newer ones knew, turned a heavy silver ring on his finger and looked at nothing for a while. The bowl buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere out in the main room a clock ticked. "And now a man with clean shoes is taking his shop," Preacher said. "Not a question. Court date inside 2 weeks. He'll lose, lawyers already given up, just hasn't told him in those words yet." Preacher was quiet a long moment. Then he said the second thing he would say that night. "Find out what the polished man buried. All of it. Names, dates, paper, the people he did it to before." His voice did not rise, and the room leaned toward it anyway. "We don't break a thing that's already standing. We don't put a hand on him. His kind wants a hand on him. A bruise he can take to a camera. A broken window he can sell. As proof, we're animals. We don't give him that. We hand the people of that county a mirror, and we let them look at what's been living among them, and we stand there while they do it." He looked down the table at Sparrow. "Quiet, clean, true. Every word of it true, so true. He can't find one thread to pull. Can you do that?" "Already started," Sparrow said. Sparrow found it in 4 days. It was not even well hidden. Men like Voss grew careless because nothing had ever cost them anything. The holding company that bought the county paper traced back through 3 shells to Voss's own name. The sewer assessment had been manufactured, the lien filed against the wrong parcel on purpose, and never corrected because no one with power had ever bothered to check. Worse and better, Voss had done it before. Sparrow found 4 other small operators along the rail district who had folded under the identical sequence: the sudden violations, the phantom lien, the dropped insurance, the regretful offers shrinking by the week. A family bakery, a welding outfit, a man who had repaired shoes in the same storefront for 41 years. All of them gone, their parcels absorbed, their names erased from a district that was quietly becoming one man's monopoly. None of it was illegal in a way. Tired county prosecutor would chase. That was the genius of it. It lived in the gap between what was wrong and what was actionable, and Voss had built his whole life in that gap. So the iron vow did not go to the law. They went to the light. Walter knew none of this. He spent those 8 days the way a man spends his last days, in a house he is about to lose, touching things, remembering them. And when the morning of the 8th day came, he had nearly convinced himself to take Voss's final insulting number and be done. He was standing in the office with the phone in his hand, the slip of paper with Voss's number on the desk, when he heard the first engine on the frontage road, then the second. Then a sound that was not individual engines anymore, but a single, low thunder rolling up out of the south, and Walter set the phone down and walked out into his own gravel lot and watched the impossible arrive. They came in formation, 2 by 2, a column of motorcycles that did not end. They filled the frontage road from the highway turnoff to the shop and kept coming, chrome catching the morning sun, the noise of them rolling across the empty fields and bouncing back off the grain elevator like weather. Walter counted without meaning to and lost the count. Passed 40 and gave up. 60 machines near enough. They wheeled into the lot in a discipline that had nothing of chaos in it, No revving, no showing off. Each rider finding a place as if the places had been assigned, the engines cutting one rank at a time from the front, until the silence that dropped over the gravel was somehow louder than all the thunder had been. Cole swung off his bike near the front. Beside him, a younger rider with a laptop bag across his chest. And at the center, climbing off a machine bigger than the rest, a heavy-set old man with a full gray beard and a black leather cut worn soft with years, a death's head patch over the heart and the word president stitched in an arc above it and below, in letters that meant nothing to Walter and everything to the men around him. Iron Vow. The old man crossed the gravel slow, taking his time, the way a man walks when no one in the world can hurry him. He stopped in front of Walter and looked at him for a long moment with eyes the color of weather. "You Pruitt, I am. You fixed one of mine on the county road, took no money. Did the work nobody asked for, because the work needed doing. Preacher said it like he was reading it off a stone. You know what that's worth, son?" "It was a ground strap," Walter said. His voice came out smaller than he wanted. "And some odds and ends. It was a debt." The old man's voice did not rise and somehow filled the whole lot. "And we pay our debts, not with money. Money's what his kind uses." He nodded once toward the highway, toward the town, toward a gray sedan that was not there yet, but soon would be. "We pay another way. You sit, you watch, you don't say a word unless I ask. Can you do that?" Walter could. He sat on the bench by the bay door, 60 riders arranged in loose ranks across his lot, and he waited with them. And not one of them spoke. And the not speaking was the most frightening and the most reassuring thing he had ever felt in his life. Voss arrived at 10 minutes past 9. He came up the frontage road in the gray sedan on his way to the courthouse with the papers that would end Walter, and he was a quarter-mile out before he understood what he was driving into. Walter watched the sedan slow, watched it nearly stop, tracked, watched it creep forward instead of fleeing, because a man who has never once faced a consequence does not know in his body what a consequence looks like, even when 60 of them are parked in a gravel lot. Voss pulled in at the edge, left a careful distance, and got out in his pressed slacks and his polished shoes, and he had arranged his face into the warm, regretful expression he wore for difficult mornings. "Walt!" he called across the lot as if the riders were scenery. "I don't know what this is, but it doesn't change anything. We've got a courthouse appointment. You and I and these gentlemen, whoever they are, can't park a lien out of existence." Preacher did not answer him. He nodded at Sparrow. The young rider stepped forward and set a laptop on the hood of Voss's own sedan, turned the screen so the morning glare did not wash it out, and began in a flat, unhurried voice to read aloud. He read the chain of shell companies that ended at Voss's name. He read the date the sewer assessment was created, and the name of the clerk who created it, and the absence of any sewer line on the parcel in question. He read the lien filed against the wrong lot and never corrected. Then he read the other names. The bakery, the welder, the man who fixed shoes for 41 years, the dates each one had folded, the dates Voss's holding company had absorbed their parcels, the price he had paid, which in every case was a fraction of worth. Voss's warm expression did not so much fall as dissolve, one feature at a time, until what stood in the gravel was a smaller man entirely. "This is private," he said, and the smoothness in his voice had developed a hairline crack. This is proprietary business information. You can't simply. There are laws about how that was obtained. I'll have every one of you. You'll have us." Preacher had not moved from where he stood. "With what badge?" "Your county standing right behind you, son." "Where is it?" He let the silence answer. Funny thing about a man who buys the law, he thinks he owns it. Then a morning comes when he needs it to show up for him, and it stays home. We didn't touch one step closer. We didn't touch a hair on you. We didn't break your car or your nose or one window of your office. Every word that boy read is true, and you know it's true. Hurting you is what your kind expects, because it's what your kind would do. We're here to make you visible. That was when Walter understood what Cole had meant by the ledger and the mirror and the light, because they had not come alone. Behind the formation, drawn by 60 engines on a dead frontage road, on a courthouse, morning, the town had come. A reporter from the county paper. Two of the aldermen who had nodded at Voss for years. The shoe repairman, old and bent and standing very straight. The baker's widow. People who had driven out to see what the thunder was and stayed to hear a young man in a leather cut read aloud, off a laptop on a polished hood, the precise mechanism of how their neighbors had been quietly devoured. Voss looked at the crowd, and the crowd looked at Voss, and Walter watched the exact instant the man's power left him, not taken by force, but evaporated by daylight, the way frost goes off a windshield when the sun finally clears the trees. "Ah, you don't understand," Voss said to the crowd now, his voice climbing. This is selective. You're hearing one side. I followed every procedure. Every single one was legal. You can ask anyone. You can ask the county. I never broke a law in my life." "No," Preacher agreed. "You never did. That's the worst thing anybody's said about you all morning. And you said it yourself." The reporter was writing. The aldermen were edging backward, performing the ancient maneuver of men who have decided which way a thing is going to fall and intend not to be under it. Voss turned to Walter, and for one moment the mask came all the way off, and what was underneath was not a villain but something smaller and more ordinary, a frightened man who had never once in his life been told no by anyone who could make it stick. Walter, listen to me. By E, whatever they've told you, whatever this is, the number's still good, I can make all of this." He gestured at the laptop, the crowd, the riders. "I can make all of this go away, you and me, like always." Walter stood up off the bench. He crossed the gravel, slow, the way Preacher had crossed it, and he stopped in front of the man who had spent a month tightening a noose around the only thing his family had ever made. And he found that the fear that had lived in his chest for 30 days was simply gone, lifted out of him by the engines and the silence and the old man's 4 flat words. He looked at Voss's polished shoes, white with gravel dust now, and at the watch that no longer glinted because the man's wrist was shaking, and he said the only thing he had to say. "I never took your number, because there was never a number. You weren't buying a shop. You were buying my father's name off a sign, and that's not for sale, and it never was. And now everybody standing here knows what you tried to do to buy it." He stepped back. "Go to your courthouse, Garrett. Take your papers. I'll be there. So will every name that boy just read. Let's all of us find out together what a judge does when the gallery's full." Voss did not go to the courthouse. He got in his gray sedan with his hands shaking too hard to hold the papers, and he backed out of the lot and pulled onto the frontage road heading the wrong direction, away from the courthouse, away from the town, out toward the highway and the flat blinding light of mid-morning. And the sedan got small and then smaller, and then it was a glint, and then it was nothing. And the riders watched it go, without a sound and without a smile, because there is no triumph in watching a small thing run, only the quiet of a debt come due. The court date dissolved within a week, the way a thing built on sand dissolves once someone names the sand out loud. The reporter's story ran on a Sunday and named the bakery and the welder and the shoe repair and the holding company and the wrong direction sewer line and the county that had sold Voss its paper, discovered abruptly an appetite for distance. The lien was vacated. The phantom violations evaporated. The condemnation posting came off Walter's office window the following Friday, and he kept it folded in a drawer the way Cole had kept the night on the county road. Somewhere he would not forget it. Voss's holding company unwound over the months that followed, parcel by parcel, the same way it had been built, and the rail district that was to have been one man's monopoly went back to being a place where people kept storefronts open out of stubbornness. The shoe repairman, it turned out, had only stopped because of Voss, and he reopened that spring, and Walter went to the grand reopening and shook the old man's hand, and neither of them said much, because they were both the kind of men who fix things for people who could not pay, and such men recognize each other and do not need a speech. That was all. Later that morning, after the sedan vanished into the light, Preacher turned back to Walter, and for the first time the weather in the old man's eyes cleared into something almost like warmth. "Your father hang that sign," he said. It was not really a question, but Walter answered it anyway. "In '71, I've kept it up since." "Keep it up longer." Preacher looked at the faded letters a while. Then he reached into his cut and took out something small and set it in Walter's blackened palm. It was a patch, hand-stitched, a small one, the kind a club gives to no one outside its own, not a member's colors. Walter understood that even in his ignorance something, though a mark. A name written in a language only 60 men in that lot could read, and now him. "You're not one of us," Preacher said. "Don't ever pretend to be, and don't ever let anyone tell you that you are. But there's a thing we keep for the people who do right by us when they had no reason to. It means this shop is under the vow now. Anybody comes at you the way that Polished Man came at you, you don't fight it alone again. You make one call." He closed Walter's fingers over the patch with one heavy hand. "You won't need to. His kind learns, they tell each other. By next month, every man with a gray sedan and a holding company in 3 counties will know there's a frontage road they don't drive down." A pause. "But you'll have the number anyway, just in case the world forgets the way it does." Then he turned, and the engines came alive, one rank at a time, the thunder building back up out of the silence, and the iron vow rolled out of Walter Pruitt's gravel lot 2 by 2 the way they had come, 60 machines threading back onto the frontage road and south toward the highway, until the last of them crested the rise by the grain elevator and dropped out of sight, and the sound of them faded down into the ordinary quiet of a Tuesday morning that had stopped being ordinary. Cole was the last to leave. He sat his idling bike a moment by the bay door, and he looked at the sign, and he looked at Walter, and there was the ghost of that almost smile again. "Told you not to sign anything." "You did. You didn't." "No," Walter said, "I didn't." Cole nodded once, the way you nod at a thing finished, and finished right, and then he kicked the bike into gear and rolled out after the others, and the single tail light shrank down the frontage road and was gone the way it had gone the first night, except this time Walter knew it would come back if he ever needed it to. And the knowing changed the shape of the silence it left behind. Walter stood in the lot a long while after the last engine died away. The morning was warming. The sign needed paint, the way it had needed paint for 10 years, and now there was no longer any question whether he would get to give it any. He went inside, set the small stitched patch on a workbench under the cage light, where he could see it while he worked, and put coffee on. The coolant leak was still down there somewhere in the engine on the lift, still hiding, still unsolved. He picked up his light and went looking for it. He found it in 20 minutes. A hairline crack in a fitting he had checked 4 times and somehow never seen. The kind of fault that only shows itself once you stop being afraid of everything else and have room in your head again to look. He pressed a new fitting in, torqued it down, topped the system off, and watched the gauge hold steady where, for 2 years, it had bled down overnight. He fixed it before lunch. Then he turned the radio on low and worked through the afternoon with the bay doors open to the spring, in a shop his father had built and his father's name still hung over, in a town that suddenly remembered it had been proud of the wrong man and would have to find a better one. And the smell that came in through the open doors was cut grass and warm gravel, and the faint blue ghost of two-stroke from a passing mower. And if you had asked Walter Pruitt in that moment what it smelled like, he would have had to think about it a while, and then he would have said it smelled like a thing he had stopped believing he was allowed to keep. If this story warmed something in you, if you have ever done a quiet kindness for a stranger and wondered whether it mattered, let it sit with you a moment before you move on. And if it moved you, leave a word below and stay close for the next one.